Hi, I'm Skinny Cheeks. So we just got some new info about the upcoming DLC dungeon pack, Waking Flame, and I wanted to make a video to share it with you guys. The DLC will be hitting the public test server on Monday, July 12th. So as always, I will be doing a thorough patch note review over on Twitch whenever the notes go live, so make sure to stop by for that if you can. Then like I did with the Blackwood chapter, I'll break down the key info from those patch notes into videos for here on YouTube. If the PTS cycle goes the way it normally does, this should put the DLC release somewhere around August 23rd. So for this video in particular, I'll be covering the Update 31 combat preview that Gilliam posted, and we'll take a look at the 8 new sets coming from the 2 new dungeons. Mike Finnegan showed these off briefly in the ESO livestream where they went through the new dungeons, so pardon the quality of my screenshots taken from that. Alright, let's start with the combat preview. Greetings. Today, the combat team would like to share what they've been working on since Update 30. While this update won't have too many large-scale changes, there are a number of little things. We'd like to highlight a few of the more noteworthy changes in this post, as well as talk about some of the behind-the-scenes work we've been doing. Let's start with something we've seen a lot of discussion on, time to kill in player versus player environments. Compared to previous updates, the amount of damage is higher across the board than it was previously, but simultaneously defensive power is lower too. This is mainly caused by 2 things: the balance standards that Champion Point 2.0 was held to in Update 29, where we introduced more choices between either offensive or defensive options, as well as boosting up stats on fresh characters with the introduction of base weapon and spell damage, and the base maximum resource adjustments from Update 30. Between these two, many builds are making more choices and improving their ability to deal or take damage while experiencing a sharper operation loss of the other. As many player builds lean towards dealing damage in PvP environments, this creates a situation where TTK lowers. While we've identified specifics such as base stat adjustments, we wanted to stay focused on where the problem was felt, which was exclusively related to PvP. Our main adjustment in Update 31 will be to Battle Spirit and focusing on the damage taken portion, increasing it so that the base character takes 60% less overall damage rather than 50%. Aside from this and a few more specific smaller adjustments, we're still monitoring many of the moving parts, such as proc set scaling, and discussing measures we can take in future updates that won't adversely affect parts of the game where problems aren't as severe. So I personally haven't been doing a whole lot of PvP, but I did jump in quite a bit for the Mid-Year Mayhem event and really had a great time with it. On some of the additional servers they opened up, the performance seemed pretty good, and overall I just had a lot of fun with it. I did notice damage being a little high, but I didn't necessarily have a problem with it except when greatly outnumbered, which has kind of always been a thing anyways, but I'm definitely no PvP expert, so I won't talk too much on this point and defer to some of the other PvP guys on this one. I'm sure Is There No One Else, Fangrush, and some of the others that focus heavier into PvP will have further comments on this new change. So let's move on. In relation to TTK and PvP in general, we're also doing a substantial pass on player abilities, item sets, and passives in Update 31 in regard to how they operate with both stealth and invisibility. This pass focuses on trying to improve the rules on what abilities should and should not hit or remove stealth or invisibility on targets, as well as fixing some issues where sneak attacks were stronger than intended in some areas. To clarify, sneak attacks or attacks made from the hidden state while crouching should only do the following: a guaranteed critical strike on 1 direct damage attack, 275% bonus critical damage against monsters if it was a melee attack, 40% bonus critical damage against monsters if it was a ranged attack, stun the target if it was a melee attack. In hopes to improve both the ability to utilize or distinctly deny and remove stealth and invisibility, we're adjusting our rules to what player attacks should break these effects or even attempt to try and hit them. Previously, this was handled purely on the ability level of these effects, like Shadow Cloak, leaving them very susceptible to breaking in a multitude of ways when complex and dynamic abilities were used against them. Now we're adjusting a significant amount of player-sourced attacks and effects to have rules applied to them, in addition to the rules built into abilities like Shadow Cloak, reaching a much more streamlined experience. For player abilities, the only things that will break stealth or invisibility are direct damage, crowd control such as stuns or immobilizes, or revealing effects such as Expert Hunter or Revealing Flare. Player damage over time abilities of any type will no longer remove targets from stealth or invisibility, but may still damage them depending on the source of their attack. AoE damage over time will damage targets under these effects, but will not remove the effects themselves. There will also now be a short window when entering stealth or invisibility, where players' single target attacks made against you will no longer cancel the activation or strip the effect. On the other hand, we've better accounted for reveals or detections in these rule sets of stealth and invisibility, so attacks won't miss as often before when utilizing them. All in all, we hope this improves both using and fighting against stealth and invisibility in ESO by improving the consistency of the experiences, so patterns and strategies may better evolve. Okay, yeah, that was quite a bit there. We'll have to see how all of this plays out, but overall, I think their goals and motivations behind the stealth changes are very good. I agree it should be a more streamlined and easy to understand system where you know these are the things that will not pull myself or others out of stealth, and these are the things that do remove stealth from myself or others. So experienced players have already figured out all the little nuances and ways to handle that anyways, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all of those things make the most sense or work in the most logical way. So I'm really interested to see how this pans out. It'll be nice if being in and breaking stealth from others is a little more intuitive. Alright, moving on to the next section. Much of our focus outside of the paths mentioned above has been on the back-end scripting of abilities and cleaning up the amount of information they have, making sure they use relevant technological advancements we've made in the recent years rather than using older and less efficient systems. For example, removing errant data or finding better ways for one-off checks and validations to be done was a large focus here, while cleaning up inconsistencies in behavior or power along the way. Expect many little changes and bug fixes as a result of this, such as improving Flame Skull's damage bonus calculation, or minor tweaks to values like Essence Drain granting major mending for a full integer duration at all ranks. So not really much to comment on this little section here. It sounds like they're just trying to go back and clean up sloppy or outdated code, which is great. One of the larger changes you'll see from this pass are reworks for the Skilled Hunter passive. I believe this is the Skilled Tracker passive he's talking about here. The Expert Hunter and its morphs visual displays on enemies, and Prismatic Weapon Enchant. Previously, all three of these effects were constantly validating themselves against massive lists to determine if your target was an undead, werewolf, or vampire, with very little payoff for the amount of extra weight they had. We've decided to retain the Slayer of Evil theme of Fighters Guild, but have it only active against players to improve performance, while still getting the feel-good identity they have. Prismatic Weapon Enchants, however, have been completely changed to better fit their theme of Tri-Resource seen from the other Prismatic Enchants. They now operate similarly to a Drain Life or Absorb Magicka weapon enchantment, but grant all three resources. So this sounds like no more 20% damage bonus against Daedra with your Fighter's Guild abilities. This will have a little effect on your Barbed Trap as a Stam DPS, but as a Mag DPS, the damage from it was already pretty low and probably won't be noticeable. And again, this is only for fights where you're against the Undead or Daedra. And then Dawnbreaker and Silver Shards won't be quite as effective against these types of enemies either. You know, always sucks a little to lose some damage, but shouldn't really make that much difference in the end. And if it has a positive impact on performance, I would rather them go that direction personally. The Prismatic enchantment is interesting. I think I'll need to think a little more and see others' feedback on it before I can decide exactly how I feel. It was pretty cool as a DPS to have an alternate enchantment to slot for certain encounters, and I don't like losing that variety, but at the end of the day, it does make our loadouts a little bit easier. I guess I'm trying to think of where the new Restore enchantments will be used, and I'm not sure off the top of my head, so we'll see what kind of stats they end up with. Alright, moving on. Outside of behind the scenes work and minor adjustments, there's a handful of larger changes or new introductions coming as well. We're adding 3 new sub-constellations to the fitness tree filled with all new slotted stars. Their names are Wind Chaser, Survivor's Spite, and Walking Fortress, with each focusing on unique aspects of core mechanics and actions. So that's pretty cool. We don't really have any more info on that now, but I'm excited to dig through it and see what new options we have there. And speaking of passives, we're also adjusting all player passives to grant hybrid versions of their stats. So things like Balanced Warrior will give weapon and spell damage plus armor, rather than weapon damage and spell resistance. So this is pretty cool here. I assume this means DKs will now have a flat armor buff instead of spell resistance as well. Should be just buffs all around, I would think, to these kinds of passives, unless they also go through and adjust the values. In addition to this, we're reworking a few older item sets that had an incredibly low amount of of player engagement. Sith's touch will now focus on zipping around from successful battles quickly one after the other. Nicholas' heavy armor will improve its ability to shrug off incoming attacks, and Crusader will receive a fitting shift to grant something more appropriate of an enabling bruiser. Likely the biggest adjustment to an existing set is Pelinal's Aptitude, which will be changed to Pelinal's Wrath, which now focuses on the bloodlust this hero of lore succumbed to and their legacy left in Tamriel. Really curious to see what they're doing here with Pelinals. I think at the very least they're probably going to adjust the 2 through 4 piece bonuses to be more offensive oriented, and I could see maybe the 5 piece going as far as to match both your spell and weapon damage and also your spell and weapon crit to the higher values. They have been slowly adding in more and more to the game to complement hybrid type setups, so really interested to see what they came up with here. And then finally, there will be some targeted buffs to niche areas of the game we currently feel are lacking. Two-Handed's ability to stick in melee encounters and offer comparable sustained damage in PvE, as well as Froststaff's ability to give the touch of cold death. Keep an eye out in the patch notes for some juicy buffs to 2 specific abilities. No idea what that means, but sounds promising. I'm always down for some cold death. The list of changes coming for Update 31 is quite long, but it's built up from many little changes rather than huge ones, so our hope is it will be less disruptive than some of our more recent updates. We still look forward to hearing your feedback and discussion that comes from the upcoming PTS cycle based on these changes. Thanks for reading, and see you in Tamriel. So that wraps that one up. It was nice to see Gilliam writing these. I think Brian Wheeler normally does these, but very interesting stuff here. Again, we will do a thorough patch note review as soon as those get released on July 12th. Alright, now let's go through all the new sets. We have 2 new light sets, 2 medium, 2 heavy, and then we'll end with 2 new monster sets. So keep in mind these were shown on a dev server with special buffs, so some of their tooltip number values are going to look insanely high, so just ignore those. We'll have to wait for the actual PTS to see where those numbers are, but you can probably expect they'll be in the same general range as other sets that do similar things. And again, these sets were screenshotted from that ESO livestream, so pardon the quality on the pictures. First up, we have Thundercaller. This has a 2-piece with penetration, 3-piece weapon and spell damage, 4-piece weapon and spell damage, and then the 5-piece. Dealing damage with a fully charged heavy attack calls a bolt of lightning at your target, dealing X shock damage and leaving a 4-meter lightning crater at their location for 6 seconds, dealing X shock damage per second to enemies touching the crater. This effect can occur once every 12 seconds and scales off the higher of your weapon or spell damage. So the first thing that really stands out to me on this one is the hybrid 2 through 4 piece stats, which is really cool, and I hope this becomes more of a norm going forward, not just on crafted sets, but on dungeon sets also doing this. It really opens up the door to more diversity and build possibilities. As far as the set itself, so it looks like it's mainly just a big direct damage and then follow-up damage over time. I'm not too big on heavy attack builds, and this will require you to do one every 12 seconds to keep it up, but it looks like the damage proc will have about a 50% uptime, and like other procs, will scale with your weapon and spell damage. Depending on where the numbers do end up, could be a fun set for those that do enjoy going the heavy attack build route. Alright, the second set is Scorion's Feast. This gives max magicka, magicka recovery, weapon and spell damage, and then when you deal damage with a fully charged heavy attack, you gain an imbued aura for 10 seconds, granting you and up to 3 group members 307 magicka and stamina recovery. This effect can occur once every 20 seconds. And then dealing damage with a fully charged heavy attack with an imbued aura active, consume it and gain an overflow aura for 10 seconds, granting you and up to 3 other group members 307 weapon and spell damage. So this one's pretty interesting. It's kind of like a hybrid sustain plus damage buff set. It does have a 20-second cooldown, so really to get the most out of it, you'll want to heavy attack for the first part of the buff, the recovery buff, and then wait as long as possible before activating the second portion. So you'll need to make sure you get that second heavy off before the end of the initial 10-second timer, or else you'll just end up waiting for the cooldown with no buffs. But if you do time it right, you can almost always have one or the other alternating in 10-second intervals. Not the craziest boost to sustain overall, and not the craziest boost to damage when you consider the 50% uptime on each, but with proper timing, both together is a pretty significant chunk of stats coming from one set. And I like that to get the most out of it, you do have to properly time that second heavy. If you don't care about the sustain, you could just do back-to-back heavies and get the same uptime on the damage portion of it, but to maximize both parts, you'll have to time that second heavy well. Pretty cool overall. I really like the design of this one. Really, the only big drawback to it is the amount of people it hits. It's only 3 other group members, which kind of kills it for 12-person trials and makes it more of a 4-man dungeon set. Alright, moving on to the medium sets. First up, we have Rush of Agony. This set gives stam recovery, weapon and spell damage, offensive penetration, and then when you deal damage from a blink, charge, leap, teleport, or pull ability, pull enemies within 10 meters to you. After 2 seconds, deal 215,000 physical damage to all enemies within 7 meters. This effect can occur once every 8 seconds and scales off the higher of your weapon or spell damage. The pool will not apply crowd control immunity to a target. This set seems pretty fun, especially for dungeon soloing or PvP. We'll have to wait and see exactly how much damage it does, but I like the concept a lot. Probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense in PvE for group play, as usually the tanks are rounding things up, but depending on how much damage it deals, could still be nice for maybe a damage dealer to run in dungeons to pull that initial pack together, and then the tank can clean up the outliers. That last line about the crowd control immunity is really interesting too, because you could pull them all in and then stun them before the damage goes off if they try to escape before that 2-second timer. Really interesting stuff here. Like the last set, seems like they're definitely thinking outside of the box with some of these. And then the next set is one of the strangest ones I've ever seen, and I absolutely love it. Whether it ends up being great or not, I don't care. The medium set is called Grizzly Gourmet. So it adds maximum stamina, weapon and spell damage, offensive penetration, and then a little bit of maximum stamina on the 5-piece. But the main thing on the 5-piece is dealing light attack damage grants you a stack of Baker's Delight for 5 seconds. When you gain 3 stacks, you create a sweet roll next to your target for 5 seconds. If you or an ally touches the sweet roll, both you and your ally gain one of the following effects. Restore 1593 health, magicka, and stamina, gain empower for 10 seconds, gain major force for 10 seconds, and this effect can occur once every 2 seconds. So first off, the fact that you can make sweet rolls in combat with this set is just absolutely ridiculous and amazing. I mean, the buff you get is called Baker's Delight. But from a combat perspective, one thing that really jumps out to me that I like over some other essence grabbing sets is that others can grab it too and you both get the buff. So you don't have to hunt them down. Someone else in your party that may be closer to that sweet roll can grab it for a nice tasty buff for both of you. The cooldown seems low enough as well to have multiple of these buffs overlapping with each other, kind of like Daedric Trickery does. Probably won't see this much in trial groups, but overall this set seems pretty sweet. Anyways, moving on to our first heavy set, we have Silver Rose Vigil. This set gives stamina, health, stamina, and then blocking an attack grants you a stack of Realm Shaper for 15 seconds, gaining up to 1 every 0.5 seconds. When you reach 3 stacks, you consume them and launch necrotic energy at your attacker, dealing 15,720 magic damage and applying major maim for 12 seconds, reducing their damage done by 10%. Once you fire the necrotic energy, you cannot gain additional stacks of Realm Shaper for 12 seconds. Damage scales off your max health. So not quite 100% uptime due to the stack building period, but could be pretty close in some cases. Major Maim is a pretty nice debuff to have. This seems pretty similar to Bonnie's Torment, which also gives around 100% uptime depending on the situation, but that set relies on taunting and also the bonus goes away if the tether breaks, whereas this one triggers from blocking and it doesn't look like the enemy can get rid of it. Should be able to be purged in PvP, but in PvE the debuff shouldn't be able to be removed. Overall, not a ton of sources of Major Maim in the game, especially from sets, so I could see this one possibly working its way into some setups. The next set is Crimson Oath's Rive. Gives you armor, max health, armor, and then when you use an ability that applies a major or minor buff to yourself or an ally, send out a wave of energy that reduces the armor of nearby enemies within 12 meters by 3541 for 15 seconds. This effect can occur once every 12 seconds and will only occur if an enemy is within range. So we'll have to see if there were any adjustments to Alkosh once we get through the patch notes, but this just seems to be a better version of it for support to run. That doesn't necessarily mean you don't run both sets though, especially for stamina compositions who are hurting for penetration. But with the ease of application with this set, only needing to cast an ability rather than grab a synergy, and the higher armor shred on the tooltip, Definitely see this one becoming a must grab for tanks. Really good stats overall and easy to get 100% uptime. Not a whole lot to say really, it's just really good and I think it'll be used in quite a lot of scenarios. And then finally we'll do the 2 new monster sets. The first one is Prior Theoric. It adds weapon and spell damage, and then on the 2-piece, dealing direct damage with an area of effect ability creates a 6-meter shadowy whirlwind beneath your enemy for 7 seconds. Enemies within the whirlwind take 200,000 physical damage each second and increase their damage taken from your area of effect abilities by 5%. This effect can occur once every 15 seconds. At first glance, I thought this might be a new support set, but the wording does seem like it may just be buffing only your personal AoE damage abilities. The uptime is pretty low though compared to the cooldown, not even quite 50% uptime, so I think this set is going to really hinge on how much damage the proc does. It also triggers from direct AoE damage, which isn't necessarily a super common type of ability to cast in a normal PvE rotation on some classes, but if the damage is high enough, this may be really nice for short burst AoE encounters. But I'm not sure about longer sustained damage, especially for boss fights, but we'll have to see where the numbers end up. Then our second monster set is Magma Incarnate. This one is interesting, I think, for 4-man dungeon groups and small PvP groups. It gives a decent uptime on the minor courage buff without needing to squeeze in the Yolnahkriin set. Doesn't seem too great for 12-person content though, as the minor courage buff is pretty easy to get to the whole group with Yolnahkriin, and with this only bouncing to 4 total people. Just doesn't really make a lot of sense there. Definitely could see it being useful in smaller groups though. I do like the idea of it, but considering the small number of people it hits, I wonder if the cooldown shouldn't be a little shorter on that. 66% max uptime would seem more reasonable on an instant buff to a large number of people, but I don't know about only 4 people, though it is giving minor resolve as well, which can be nice if you don't have combat prayer, but a bit redundant if you do. I do like the set though for sure. I'm just not sure if I'm 100% sold on that mediocre uptime. Alright, that wraps this one up. I wasn't expecting to get a glimpse at all of the new sets in the ESO livestream, so that was a nice surprise. I'm interested to hear what you guys think about the new gear. Let me know in the comments. I'll dive into this a bit further once we have a bit more info and make sure to get you guys all the juicy details from the patch notes. A big thanks to my current Patreon supporters. If you'd like to see how you can help support the channel through Patreon, I'll have a link in the description below. And a special thanks to Nicholas, Simon, Privy League Guild on PlayStation's EU server, Cougar is Bay in the Cougar Town Guild, Gandalf Legris, Stridig, and Delta. Thank you all so much for stopping by. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.